sir.
So I'm at Sky Lake. I didn't do too many videos, but we came up with this interesting thing that I couldn't really pass up. This is a book that one of my good friends had found. It's Up Shit Creek, and he's a really experienced camper, and he's going to be reading a story from Up Shit Creek, and he's going to explain a little bit about the book. So if you're out there and you're camping and you want to check out this book, so could you tell us what exactly you're going to be reading, and I mean about the topic in essence?
It's Up Shit Creek by Joe Lindsay.
Right.
It is a book about mishaps with toilet systems
Awesome.
along the river. When you're on the river, they use what they call groovers, which, in a nutshell, is some sort of storage compartment for number 2.
Awesome.
And this story is titled The Day the Mormon Swore.
And friends, this is rated by Toilet Papers. This is how big of a rating?
This is a groover type classic without bags, which means it's literally a metal can that just stores your number 2. And its rating is 6 TP rolls.
Awesome. So I'm just going to focus on the fire, and Mike's going to read this awesome story.
6 TP rolls is, the warning is, actual nausea is the most common reaction. So be prepared. This could be a fun story.
Yeah, and little addition. So just watch the fire, and, you know, this is going to be awesome.
In doing my research for this book, I came across many tales of this nature. They were all quite vile, but this one tickled my fancy a little more than the others because of a few unique details. It is truly a horrifying tale. Read on, only if you feel you are prepared for 6 rolls of nastiness. Denny was a Mormon. He was no Jack Mormon either. He was the real McCoy. It was said that for as long as anyone could remember, Denny had never sworn at or insulted anything or anybody. He just wasn't that kind of guy. He'd say, "Oh gosh," or "shucks," and things like that, but would never let loose with any of the more base, commonly used expletives. Those were not for him. He was good. The kind of guy who would ask, "How are you?" and really want to know. A genuinely nice guy. Denny was clean and good looking, tall and strong, with blue eyes that glinted in the sun beneath his river hat. He had straight, strong, blindingly white teeth. His dad owned the rafting company where Denny was the general manager, and he had grown up on the river, had been guiding rafts since he was a teenager. He loved rafting and the culture that surrounded it, although there were times at river guide gatherings when he would become uncomfortable, what with all of the drinking and polluting of temples that was going on around him. He didn't let that get between him and his buddies, though. They were just different from him. He loved them and never said a bad thing, nor, as far as anyone could gather, thought a bad thought about any of them. He was pure and strong and kind. He wore pastel polo shirts, which he tucked into his shorts. His hair was always short, and stubble was never seen upon his face. That was Denny, and everybody loved him. May 27th, 1988. Mike and Bucky had been working in the rain for about an hour, unloading the wet gear from a 3-day early spring trip on the forks of the Kern. They scurried back and forth from the bed of the rusting white 1968 Dodge Power Wagon to the dry, cavernous warehouse echoing with the ping of raindrops. They wore hooded rain jackets, ratty blue jeans, and hiking boots that tracked mud onto the warehouse's smooth cement floor. It had rained for the last 3 days with no breaks. The river had been high and runnable, but the constant rain had taken its toll on both of them. Neither had been dry for 72 hours, and they looked forward to warm showers, dry clothes, and a few rounds of shuffleboard and beers at the Shady Lane Saloon, the local guide hangout. Bucky had trained on the trip, rowing his own raft and learning as much as he could about the river when he wasn't flailing down it. He had provided many hours of entertainment, as well as plenty of emergency rescue practice for the other members of the crew. He wrapped his raft around granite boulders in the middle of large Class 5 rapids 3 separate times and flipped twice. The waterproof bags that season were old and leaky. So many of the guests never wore dry clothes or slept in dry sleeping bags for the whole 3 days. Things had worked out, though. The guides had built large fires, brewed a lot of coffee and cocoa, and set up ingenious tarp contraptions that sheltered everyone from the rain. So the trip had actually been quite enjoyable. Then, on the last night, Glenn, one of the guides, discovered that there was no meat for the night's dinner. Somehow the chicken had been forgotten. All they had was rice, bread, vegetables for a salad, and a few other random food items banging around in the bottom of the coolers. After a few moments brainstorming and taking inventory of his larders, Glenn decided that he would steal the sausage from the next morning's breakfast and use the rice, veggies, and an assortment of herbs and spices to create rice sausage surprise. The result was a big hit, and apparently a few of the guests asked Glenn for his recipe. It was a fine bit of improvising. The rain continued to plink steadily onto the sheet metal roof of the warehouse. Bucky was now in the bed of the power wagon, handing rocket boxes and coolers down to Mike. "Hey Mike, you're trip leader. You have to deal with the Groover," he said joyfully as he handed down the heavy rocket box with "Groover" stenciled across its lid in blue lettering. "I know, Bucky. I'll just put it here by the fence for now, and we'll deal with it as soon as we get everything else done," Mike said as he set the box down carefully next to the chain-link fence. It had been a full trip, 15 people, 3 days, lots of turds in that box. "You mean you'll deal with it?" "Yeah, right, Bucky. I'll deal with it." In many commercial rafting companies, it is an unwritten rule that the lead guide is responsible for dumping and cleaning of the groover. Mike knew that this was his duty, and he had every intention of doing it, but he also had a lot of other things on his mind that cold and rainy afternoon. Things like dryness, shuffleboard, beer, and Patsy Cline playing on the jukebox. They worked hard and quietly for another 30 minutes, washing coolers, folding sandy tarps, hanging up wetsuits, placing frames and oars in their designated spots. Finally, they were finished. "Good job, Buck. Let's get back to the house and take those showers. I could use one." "Yeah, you could," said Bucky. "I've been smelling your polypro for the last 3 days. Nasty." "Shut up and get in the truck, you rookie," said Mike, jokingly as he pulled the driver's side door shut with a creak of its hinges. Bucky eagerly jumped into the passenger side and slammed his door. He was full of the enthusiasm of a young guide, and he liked hanging around with Mike, just like one of the guys. Mike was a great guide, and Bucky respected him. As they drove out of the warehouse parking lot, leaving track marks in the thin brown mud, neither noticed the rocket box with the blue stencil letters still sitting heavily and quietly by the chain-link fence. That night, Bucky and Mike had a great time at the Shady Lane. Shuffleboard, beer, Patsy, and many gnarly river stories. Mike woke up early the next morning. He had to work an 80-day outward-bound backpacking course and needed to get up to Oregon by the next day for his pre-trip meeting with the other instructors. After he had organized the duffel bags of clothes and milk crates of food and books in the back of his green 1968 VW Squareback, he pulled out of the guidehouse driveway, trying not to spill the coffee which he held between his legs, and drove down Highway 178 into the glare of the early spring sunshine. He would not return to Kern Valley until September. As Mike was putting on his shades, kicking off his river sandals, and placing his left foot on the dash, a powerful gust of wind blew through the Kern Valley. Mike felt it push the square green car that he called Zook slightly to the right, but he easily corrected and continued down the highway. Back in the warehouse parking lot, a piece of rotting, spongy plywood that was leaning against the chain link caught that blast of wind and fell sideways, slicing through the air. Its edge fell solidly into the moist mud in front of the forgotten Groover. A light rain began to fall in the valley. Mike turned on his wipers, took off his shades, and turned the volume up. He liked this song. August 15th, 1988. The valley was like an oven, even early in the morning. It was 7 o'clock, and only a few shreds of shade were left in the dusty warehouse parking lot. The area was littered with the peculiar things that collect in such places. The rusting hulk of a 1964 Mercedes sedan, 30 salvaged toilets with weeds sprouting from their orifices, discarded garden hoses, beer cans, broken down belt sanders, an old bus parked in the weeds on the far side, broken oars, tattered life vests, old scraps of rotting lumber, all of it covered with a fine coat of the brown dust that whirled around the lot in frantic, angry funnels. The average high temperature that summer was 97 degrees. Denny swallowed hard and pulled the visor of his baseball cap down to shade his cracking lips. His blue eyes were squinting into the hot, dirty wind as he walked through the lot. He didn't have a whole lot on his schedule that day, since it was late in the season and business was slowing down. It had been a great summer. They had run many trips and had even made a little money, which was a rarity in the outfitting business. He was out for a walk around the warehouse, checking things out, just poking around. Denny had never really liked all of the old, worthless stuff that his dad collected. It seemed useless to him to hold on to things just because they might need them someday. He knew, for instance, that they would never use all those toilets. Why did they keep them? Jeez, he thought to himself, it seems so darn silly. He saw a piece of dry and flaking plywood leaning against the chain link fence. His dad probably wanted to save this to make some gear decks out of, which was ridiculous, because that wood was plain rotten and couldn't be used for anything. Anyone could see that. Denny reached out and grabbed the sheet of wood irritably and jerked it back. The early morning sun shone down on the rocket box for the first time in 3.5 months. Denny could not see the blue stenciled letters because they were covered with dust. He said as he studied the box. The sides of the can were bulging outward. The lid had curved and was slightly warped. A tight and shiny metal skin. Denny crouched to get a better look at the box, his light blue polo shirt coming untucked from his shorts. Had the light been better, or had he been thinking more clearly, perhaps he would not have reached toward the release mechanism on the clamp closest to him. He says now that his hand didn't even touch the lever, but that once it was close enough, merely the agitation of the air molecules was enough of a disruption to detonate that festering, well-seasoned turd bomb. The big-haired ladies gossiping in the realty office across the street heard the dull thud of the explosion as they fell silent. Danny can't remember what he heard. He actually doesn't remember much of anything from those first few seconds. But my exhaustive research suggests the following sequence of events. When Denny touched the clamp, the lid flew up with a deafening blast. Since its other side was still attached to the box, the lid jammed open at an angle. At that instant, a thundering geyser of liquefied, superheated, 3-month-old shit slammed into the angled underside of the lid and ricocheted squarely into Denny's face. His head snapped back from the force, and he was knocked to the ground and sent sprawling in the dust of the parking lot.
Oh, that's great!
His entire upper body and head covered in the vile mixture. He sat silently in disbelief, the explosion still ringing in his ears. The box then continued to anoint him with a fine, reeking mist as the lid bobbed up and down like a hellish Pac-Man. He blinked twice and then began to do something he had never done before. He said some bad words.
Nice.
The ladies in the realty office say that they never heard such horrible language. They say that he went through every word in the book that morning, but his favorite was the S word, which he just kept saying over and over as he wiped his eyes and stumbled through that strange collection of old toilets that his dad was saving. The end.
Well, there you have it. You think this should be rated 18 or? Nice. Thanks.